recording this because it's great. Oh, we are recording now.
Yes. Hi, Preston.
Just about
Lindy.
ready.
Jill, you got here, Jill.
Uh-huh.
Lindy,
You got
Yes.
here. Hi,
Lindy,
Jill.
do you think we should
Yes,
begin?
I do think we should begin, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
For the link.
I will ask, I mute everybody else.
Okay. Well, we've taken.
You are muted, David.
Yeah, we've taken the drastic step of muting everybody. Before we start, a couple of suggestions. One is that you might want to listen to the lecture on speaker view. And if you don't know how to do that, on the top right of your screen, you should see something that says view. And if you click on view, you can choose speaker view, which is what I've now done. The other thing is that at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that says live transcript. And for those who may find it useful, if you click on live transcript, you can choose to view, to show subtitles. And if you click on show subtitles, you'll get a running transcript of what's being said. So that might be useful. And you can also change the settings. It says subtitle settings, and you can make them bigger or smaller, depending on what suits you. So that's just a suggestion. Okay. Well, this is really both weird and wonderful. The Foulkes Lecture in my own study. Welcome to you all, and particularly welcome to those who might not have been personally greeted when you arrived. There's already 300, more than 300, and we've got more than 450 people registered for this Foulkes Lecture, so I'm sure there will be more people coming. How long we have been waiting to hear Sue's lecture. How long it is since we first asked Sue to begin the process of writing it for us. 18 months or so ago, we agreed with Sue that we could not bear to lose the opportunity to hear her lecture and to respond to it together, or what was together then, in one another's physical presence. What changes must have occurred in us in the last year that now make this bearable? And we shall see what we will make of it. Having registered, you know that we invited you to make the payment that you could afford. Looking forward, this is how we intend to manage all of our events, so that those who can afford to pay more are able to support those who are not. The response has been encouraging, enabling us to cover all the costs involved with a surplus which will allow us to continue making our events open to all who wish to be part of them. Last year, through the combined efforts of our wonderful GASi activists and our Spanish colleagues, we were able to preserve the work of many contributors to the cancelled Barcelona Symposium in the first online symposium. In the circumstances, this was a remarkable achievement. I can't name all of the people who made this possible, but we owe them much gratitude. We initiated the first weekly international large group, which met for 3 months and inspired the creation of another ongoing large group still hosted in India every Sunday. We enjoyed a webinar about online working and an encounter with pandemic paintings in another meeting. We have created a regular seasonal gathering for all of our members, while the quarterly members group has now become accessible to many members who were not previously able to join it in London. We are partners in hosting a workshop on homophobia, and in July, the summer school will have an online incarnation. And this year, the winter workshop will also have an online face. And in 2023, we will organize the Belgrade GASi Symposium. Here is the first flyer, which you'll now be able to find and download from our website. And since I'm speaking about accessibility, I'd like to remind you, those of you who are GASi members, that our AGM takes place online next Sunday at 2 o'clock UK time. You'll have received details by email, and I encourage you to join us for the AGM, the annual general meeting. The Foulkes Lecture has always been a moment when GASi has had an encounter with itself while celebrating new ideas about group analysis from some of its leading thinkers. It gives us a connection with the past and the encouragement that comes from realizing that we are still developing as a movement of socially engaged psychotherapists. Along with the rest of the world, we've borne the losses of the last 2 years, and we are still living in very dark times. We struggle to find ways to speak to one another about the war, violence, occupation, racism, homophobia, and of course, the misogyny in all our worlds, about the impact that these have on relationships between us within GASi. How we find our way through and what sort of world we emerge into remains to be seen. I'm confident that our meetings this weekend will play a small but important part in helping us to understand our situation. Let us relish who we are today, whilst looking forward to the time when we can touch each other again. Now, Linde is going to introduce our Foulkes lecturer, Sue Einhorn. Thanks, Linde.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning, as it may be. My name's Linde Wotton, and I'm chair the scientific program for GASi. And together with my colleagues, we've been preparing this unusual Foulkes lecture. Never before have we had such a large audience for this important event in the group analytic calendar. It's a testament to Sue and to her prescience last year in choosing a topic that has come ever more to the fore over the last 12 months. It is also a testament to the wide reach of the group analytic community across the world. We have participants from at least 30 different countries today. For any of you who may have joined the meeting since David started, we just recommend that you use speaker view so that you get a clear view of the speaker and their slides. Please keep your microphone off so that we don't get any background noise. And if you want to use the subtitles, they're under the CC button at the bottom of your screen. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Sue Einhorn as our Foulkes lecturer today. Sue has had a varied career, having worked as a literary agent, a detached youth worker, a community worker, and a senior lecturer in social work. She's worked clinically at the Women's Therapy Centre and at the Medical Foundation for the Care of Victims of Torture. She's currently a training group analyst for the IGA UK and has a private clinical practice. Sue has always had a curiosity about how group analysis manifests itself in different contexts, different cultures and political settings. She runs workshops and teaches internationally, and it's for that reason that we have so many of her colleagues, friends, and acquaintances from so many different countries here with us today. She convened the training of group analysts in St. Petersburg and currently supervises senior group analysts in Russia and Denmark. She herself was scientific chair of GASi for 6 years. She's currently setting up a group analytic foundation and diploma course in Singapore. And she's a member of GAN London and of the Older Therapists Women's Group. So Sue, thank you for accepting our invitation to lecture. I'll just share my screen so that I can show your slides and turn my microphone off, and it's over to you.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Linde, for those kind words. And thank you, everybody, for being so patient and waiting yet another year. Thank you, David. And thank you, GASi, for honouring me by asking me to be this year's Foulkes Lecturer. Like Emily Dickinson, I've been out with lanterns looking for myself. But I want to also thank those women and men who've been alongside me, sharing their memories and ideas with me during my search, including my 5 respondents, Ronnie tonight, Shama, Anna, Johanna, and Soraya tomorrow. And I also want to thank my very special daughter, Louisa, who's here today. I'm going to start by quoting this Toni Morrison thing. The self-sabotage rife amongst women is no secret, but what may be unclear is why we insist on chains. So I feel a little like Alice in Wonderland's White Rabbit. At some point in the last year, I was pulled down a COVID rabbit hole and invited to the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, where I felt trapped as I tried to understand the rules of this new country. Whatever I wrote in preparation for the Foulkes Lecture last year could not ignore our shared experience of this extraordinary year. We have been locked in our boxes, gazing out at others imprisoned in theirs. Sadly, I have the dubious honour of being the first Foulkes Lecturer, and hopefully the last, to only be on Zoom. I declined this honour last year because I really wanted a live engagement with these ideas, as the lecture is designed to refresh and raise issues, not to give answers. One advantage, however, that has been mentioned already is that this event is accessible to many of you who would not have been able to afford to get to London. And so I welcome with great pleasure colleagues from India, Russia, Albania, and Singapore, as well as those of you I know from Slovenia, Portugal, Serbia, Norway, Denmark, Israel, Ireland, and the UK. And I gather there are other countries that I don't actually have connections with who are also here. Welcome. The group analytic maxim that the social penetrates to the core has never been so evident as in this last year. Poverty is a gender, class, and race issue, but women suffer disproportionately. Many, especially Black, Brown, and working class women in the UK were furloughed early, only to lose jobs later, or were unable to sustain children at home and continue to work. The evidence of the escalation of violence in the home towards primarily women and children has been confirmed by helplines. In fact, Jacqueline Rose described it recently as what she called the shadow pandemic. There is also evidence that the pandemic has put women's earning capacities and mental health back several decades. Once again, women are supporting women. A quick trip around my local food banks, for example, found primarily female volunteers. George Floyd's death in the USA and Sarah Everard's murder here in the UK led to demonstrations and reinvigorated discussions about racism and women's rights to safety on the streets. Despite the intimate deprivations of meeting on Zoom, all these issues have been acutely part of my therapy groups, together with the personal impact of COVID and the continuing therapeutic reflections of group members. This paper, then, is a slice of the whole, as it focuses on how misogyny affects women's relationships with each other. I propose that women keep renewing the power relations of patriarchy and the contempt of misogyny through policing each other. What then does this mean for our clinical work? I question how the unconscious patriarchal formulation of group analytic theory erases or disavows what misogyny does to women in the home in our relationship to our body, and above all, to what it does to mothers, and so to our relationships with each other as women. I don't think many women actually hate women or hate being a woman, but women's self-contempt and lack of confidence is a social issue, not just a personal one. It is not only in the social unconscious, but also very alive in our social and personal consciousness. Slide 2. To put it simply, patriarchy and sexism are the social context in which we continue to live, and misogyny is contempt, sometimes hatred for women. Misogyny is how patriarchy and sexism are performed within our relationships. Sexism is the ideology that supports patriarchal social relations, and misogyny reinforces its assumptions. Okay, I would like to begin with this picture by Paula Rego, which encapsulates what I am saying. In the picture are 3 generations of women, with the oldest woman, probably grandmother, looking at her granddaughter, smiling and questioning what she sees. The phoenix has risen behind her, and I wonder if her granddaughter reminds her of her own youth and desire. Grandmother is unable to see her daughter. As well as being grandmother's daughter, she is now a mother and woman, so in a separate world to her own mother. In her mirror version, grandmother is weary and doesn't seem to be smiling, but no one is looking into her mirror. To what extent are older women invisible? This is a picture about women, and so the man is flattened against a wall and painted into it because the couple are in the minds of the others and cannot be seen. The granddaughter is in the center, dressed for a party and looking at herself askance. Will she do? Should she take pleasure in her image? Actually, of course, her mirror image is different to the seated image. So does it represent how she would like to see herself? And whose voice is assessing how she thinks she looks? She is judging herself, but caught between the generations, between mother and grandmother. Then there is the woman to one side, unseen by the others, but painted in red and demanding our attention. She is full of erotic or perhaps bestial actions. Is the frog a prince to be kissed or something disgusting? She is a hidden, forbidden woman who doesn't belong in the domestic world of the main picture. So my interest in the invisibility of women may be curious when I am visibly here, but what I am interested in is just that, what remains invisible. The story about the struggles, both conscious and unconscious, that are suffused with misogyny. To do this, I have translated these aspects of woman into 3 levels of complexity. Each level is both unconscious and highly conscious. The first level is her public persona, is who a woman presents herself to be through clothes, language, and body image. She is there to be looked upon, cloaking her in a performance of self-esteem, and so for many women is how she passes publicly. She has internalized the maternal gaze and looks at herself as though she is other, as though she can see herself through the eyes of those whose approval she seeks. The granddaughter in the picture, perhaps. However, there are 2 other aspects operating at the same time, themselves both conscious and unconscious. The second level is the critical chorus. For many women, even while out in the world, there will be a cacophony of voices within her own head, judging and evaluating her. Most of the voices are women's, sisters, friends, daughters, mother, other mothers. They are all present, assessing whether she is acceptable or has embarrassed herself, been seen as attention-seeking maybe, said the wrong thing, been misunderstood, or perhaps one of the greatest fears of all, being found out or exposed as false. Let me quote Zahra Mohammed, who, when asked about being appointed head of the Muslim Council of Britain, replied, "Like all women, I suffer from imposter syndrome. I've always had crippling self-doubt. I will come up with 100 reasons why not to put myself forward that maybe someone else, a man, is better." When things are going well, the critical chorus is quiet until doubt or anxiety creep in. Do our therapy groups add to the voices or quieten them? The third level, the secret cage of emotions, where longings and desire are often buried, while a woman continues to try to meet her needs through giving to others and being what others need her to be. Women have a deep understanding that there is always an exchange. A woman's needs are crucially connected to meeting the needs of those with more agency, parents or men or lovers, as well as meeting the needs of those who depend upon her. Women, in fact, are pulled in so many directions at once that they often live in what I call an ectoplasm of guilt. At this level, we disavow or repress conflicts and shame. It is the level of suppressed aggression and sometimes rage, but because forbidden, often experienced as anxiety or depression. It is the level of envy and jealousy, hatred even of what other women seem to have that they do not. It may well be expressed through gossip. Of course, gossip requires its own paper all to itself. It is still feeling hurt or shamed by events in the past that seem to repeat in the present. It is also the level of women's loneliness. If all these emotions are forbidden and filled with shame, they become part of that dark place, often described as a void or as feelings of emptiness and experienced as loneliness. One woman described it to me as her cage of emotions. In the Paula Rego picture, I think she's probably the forbidden woman at the side with legs wide open, because this level is also imbued with women's fear of being humiliated and often ambivalence at best or shame at worst towards their own body. So continuing the invisible woman. Our mothers and grandmothers transmit their need for their daughters to become women as they understand a woman to be. The social context will influence how this is expressed. What class position she occupies, for example, or whether she's from a minority group, whether she was born in this country or elsewhere. But for many, the structure I am describing holds fast because it is all in the context of patriarchy. Crucially, this includes the need to protect and make daughters safe by teaching them to conform to the mother's experience of this patriarchal world. I suggest that such teaching is reinforced in the playground and often developed and distorted through friendships with other women. Some women come to our groups to find the skills to make friends and ease isolation, or to recover from the difficulties such friendships may have had. I know that for many women, their female friends have been a bedrock, and when in trouble, such friends will be there, some of them anyway, for love and support. But one thing became very clear. Many of the women with whom I spoke had been bullied at some point in their lives, particularly at school and specifically by other girls. Many have also said that although their hearts had been broken by lovers, they had felt more hurt, let down, and betrayed by women, by friends, sisters, daughters, and mothers. Women, what are we doing to each other? For example, why do women collude? Why did women vote for Trump against Hillary Clinton? So this lecture assumes a recognition of the political nature of group analysis. I see political understanding as essential to the understanding of power relations. If we avoid such power relations within our groups, then we ignore the fact that patriarchy, by definition, is a power relationship that includes sexism. For me, political perspectives are the power and hierarchical aspect of ethics. Foulkes, Freud, Deutsch, and others of their era embraced many different disciplines in their search to understand our psychological development. And I wish to include political discussions about power and feminism as important disciplines of our time. So to link to group analysis for a minute, because our groups replicate patriarchy, women replicate their taught need to be acceptable and submit. What would it mean if this invisible aspect of woman did become visible in the group? The potential for group analytic theory to embrace intersectionality is embedded in what Dalal described as the radical Foulkes. I see this in the concept of the matrix, which suggests the interlocking and overlapping nature of both similarity and difference. In moving from the couch to the circle, Foulkes was including our histories and cultures, both shared and separate. To misquote Winnicott, there is no such thing as a person apart from the social context into which that person's both conscious and unconscious is born and raised. When people come together, so do all these many aspects. Thus, there are many shakes to the kaleidoscope of past and present, of individuals penetrated by the social, of current ideas challenging a status quo, but a status quo that often seeks to change, but so that nothing fundamental will change. We often tweak the fundamentals, but they don't actually want to change that much. Continuing the story. I'm sitting in a large group of about 80, where is so often my experience, men are challenging each other about how they should behave and what should be talked about, and as therapists, what they really think is going on. The women are mainly quiet, but then one woman challenges a senior male figure. He turns on her in fury and rudely squashes her. The women in the group do and say nothing. They are in the majority. Even more astounding is that when the women do enter the conversation, what they want is attention from the senior male figures, one of whom was the attacker, so that their challenges seem to me to be put in a very feminine, slightly seductive way. The female conductor attempts to intervene, but is mostly ignored. And at the end of this large group, she turned to me, I happened to be sitting next to her, and asked, where is the mother in the group? Does she exist? This question, where is the mother in the group, resonated with me and left me puzzled. As is coherent with what I have been saying, she is invisible. How clear it was in this large group that the powerful male was father lover. In fact, male conductors in our groups do tend to represent father lover. So what is the transference to a female conductor, or indeed to women in a group? Right, mothers. To talk about mothers, I would like to show another Paula Rego print donated to the Women's Therapy Centre some years ago. Actually, I notice that the National Gallery is having an exhibition at Paula Rega this year. So perhaps I'll meet some of you there. Paula Rega paints strong women whose feet are firmly on the ground. They are women with well-developed muscles to tackle the lives they lead. But these women are always imbued with an awareness of their own vulnerability and the dangers of the world in which she labors. This picture describes a strong, capable working woman who takes her demanding little mother on her lap. They look at each other warily, and both of them know that in the background is either the neglected weeping grandmother or her mother's own neglected weeping self, or even perhaps the daughter's own neglected weeping self. This picture then is about the transmission through the generations of women's distress and their longing to be looked after. A woman's relationship with her mother is the beginning of the inculcation of misogyny. The relationship between mother and daughter has been explored at length in novels, plays, and of course in psychoanalytic theory. What I think is useful for us as therapists is that, as Nancy Chodorow says, mother doesn't differentiate herself from her daughter because they are of the same sex. And the daughter similarly does not have to grapple with gender difference and is free to identify with mother. However, this is a mother who herself would have internalized misogyny from her mother and from her cultural context. To quote Nancy Chodorow, what may be problematic in the development of gender identification for girls concerns a negatively valued gender category, and with an ambivalent maternal figure whose mothering and femininity are accessible but devalued, and often indeed conflictual for the mother herself. Mother may well have contempt for women, even underneath, for the women she loves. She will also carry fear of male power or male sexual entitlement. I think that girls imbibe through their mother's milk and in their mother's arms a social context which includes misogyny. Thus, girls may well struggle to separate from mother. The glow of her love as her daughter fulfills her mother's needs, to be a good mother or to be mothered by her daughter, or to ease mother's loneliness, make her daughter's needs a continuation of mother's needs. This aspect of female development, the different levels of a woman that I described earlier, are part and parcel of becoming a daughter and a woman. A mother wants to protect her daughter from the dangers of the world outside the home. One of the safest ways to protect daughters is to encourage conformity. This will include the importance of inculcating shame, including the shame of desire. I have been asked, what are mothers afraid of? Well, Margaret Atwood famously wrote that men are frightened that women will ridicule them, but women are frightened that men will kill them. And currently also see Jacqueline Rose's book on violence and on violence against women. This quote is important here because under patriarchy, riddled with class relations and racism, the fear of male violence underpins misogyny. Women police each other to protect themselves from the risks attached to male violence, but also police each other against the risks of not conforming. In fact, I would suggest that women often feel freer to express their own aggression and even violence, painful as it is, but safer when directed to sisters, children, and friends. Thus, I think women also fear each other. Motherhood triggers this secret cage of emotions, as there's also the fear for mothers that reside in the emotions aroused by giving birth. Feelings of love and hate overwhelm. Winnicott describes it as a time of madness. There are feelings of desire or repulsion, especially as the body that delivered the baby leaks blood and milk and sweat. Luce Irigaray describes how women are erotic all over their bodies, not just in gentler areas. Indeed, for many women, deeply erotic feelings are also part of their relationship with their baby. So now to the burden of being the perfect mother. There are a plethora of books and articles on how to be the perfect mother, and so to have the perfect baby. However, this demand to be the perfect mother and the huge distress as mother fails again and again can lead mother to take her distress out on a child that cannot fulfill her need to be recognized as this perfect mother. There's a fantasy somewhere that such a child will repair the damage done to the mother when she was a child. How haunted mother is by her ambivalence, both hating and loving her children, but finding the exhaustion and the need to be a perfect mother overwhelming. The home can become a prison. The ongoing, overlooked battle for free childcare and real financial support, including adequate housing for parents, never happens here in the UK, as motherhood should be its own reward. A more accurate reading is that of social contempt for women, especially women raising children out of wedlock. Those with the power continue to punish both women and children with poverty in every sense. How a woman who has become a mother needs to present herself in a society where mothers are both idealized and denigrated is perhaps summed up in the term yummy mummy. She is there to be consumed by all, but the voices inside her will be clamoring. Is she good enough? Will she and the baby survive? If she has a partner, will the partner provide support and protection, or does she become her partner's mother as well? How will she manage when she's alone? And anyway, if she doesn't have a partner, isn't she even less of a person if she is alone? The powerful feelings evoked when a baby cries or feeds or looks unblinkingly at her mother's face meld into love, exhaustion, and the feelings that life will never return to normality. Everything has changed forever, and for a first mother in particular, in a way it has been impossible to anticipate. It is out of control, but somehow in baby's control. Mother may put herself to one side for the moment, but that deep yearning, that inner rage and neglect, perhaps written most vividly in Rosie Parker's book, Maternal Ambivalence, is a battle. For many women, they lose what sense they had of being a person in their own right, and they long for a mother to look after them. Okay, to return to the group analytic context for a minute. I have described how a social context that includes misogyny is both transmitted and experienced by women as they become mothers. Misogyny will also be inculcated to her male children and is as damaging to men in a different way, but that is another paper. In the large group I talked about earlier, what could mother have done that would have changed the process? Were the women in the group who attended to the powerful men fearful of being attacked, as one of them had been? Were they attracted to the power of these men, and so wanted more power for themselves by association? Were the silent women envious of those that spoke out, or just happy to let them continue the status quo? Perhaps these women were just taking their rightful place as invisible and submitting to our large group tradition where father lover leads the way. Group analytic theory still connotes the group as body, heart, and womb, with the conductor as the male principle representing the mind. To quote Earl Hopper, in 2016, he says, "I would suggest that groups connote unconsciously the mind and body of the mother." And later in the same article, while discussing some very difficult feelings in the large group, he says, "These projections of envy and hostility also involved a splitting of the father of science and books from the mother of music and more intimate forms of holding and containing." What then, can I ask you, what then is a woman's mind? Is it helpful to describe her mind as her masculine part? Because it may well be that a woman's mind does operate differently to a man's mind. I don't think that a man who inhabits the mother of music with intimate forms of holding and containing is necessarily accessing his maternal part. We are more complex than this. However, in the group analytic transference, as I've said, the male conductor is nearly always father lover. What then is the transference to a female conductor? These ideas are coherent with Foulkes' writing. A brief biography of the women in his life shows that there were many. There were 3 wives, 2 daughters, a nanny wet nurse, as well as his mother. He was also analysed by a very powerful woman, by Helena Deitch. So women were powerful in his life, but invisible in his writing. The only powerful woman that I'm aware of who was part of the intellectual development of group analysis, together with the founding fathers, was Ilse Seglo. In reading about her, I decided that she was my group analytic mother, although I never met her. In fact, her views were unacceptable, and she left or was pushed out and founded the London Centre for Psychotherapy here in the UK. Foulkes wrote in an era when men were dependent on wives, grandmothers, often female servants as well, to care for their home and children, so that the men were free to study and work. I believe the home that nourished the family and fostered male dependence on women became the matrix of group analysis. Women were invisible as people, but their influence and the need for them was ubiquitous, as indeed is the matrix as part of our theoretical framework. This is also a definition of patriarchy. Women as the caregivers belonging to their men and their children. The matrix as the creative womb of group analysis, being translated by the external mind of the conductor, the male mind, bringing thoughts and words into the home. In our theoretical framework is the more conservative nature of the foundation matrix in conflict with the desire for change to be found in the dynamic matrix. Isabel Conlon, in a paper written by Bonnie Gold and Roberta Green way back in 1999, asked why it was so difficult for Foulkes to see the idealized aspects of mother in the father conductor. What would it have meant for him and other men to be mother in that situation? She says it would have meant that in the transference, they too would have to experience the group's denigration of mother and integrate her less maternal qualities, forcing them to explore their own idealization of mother in the countertransference. In the large group I described, mother was denigrated by being made invisible, while potency lay with father lover. Were the women intimidated by the male violence? Perhaps for some women, their aggression was projected into the male, leaving the women self-protective and flirtatious. I don't know, but the issue for me is why women collude with this, and in what way do we need to look again at our theory to challenge the almost common sense acceptance of this status quo. So to move on to friendship rapidly. Friendship between women has been described to me as the bedrock of a woman's survival and the family of choice, rather than the family of birth. However, as with family, friendships between women are complex. Cynthia Coburn wrote, "Misogyny has brought women together as well as pushed them apart." I think when women prioritize themselves in terms of their children or abortion rights, or the need to stop the killing of their sons in war, they're able to unite and fight across the Catholic-Protestant divide in Ireland or the Serbian-Croatian divide in the Balkans, for example. They do it through friendship. What these women say is that when a woman becomes a friend, her struggles mirror the struggles of the other. And so, through friendship, differences can be overcome. These are women who are fighting misogyny and prioritizing the urgency of their cause because we understand the personal is political. Thus, the political brings women of difference together in friendship so that the differences between them are not othered when we engage in a common struggle. In the many conversations I have had, however, because of the more hidden part of themselves, there is also a deep loneliness in women that is searching for connection. Perhaps the loneliness began when meeting mother's needs and losing sight of her own self. Could friends separate the daughter from her mother, or will her friends repeat what the daughter has always known, her mother's way of being female? I see friendships or sisterhood as part of this search. Sorry, but something odd on my screen here. So this is a third wonderful painting by a colleague, Di Rogan. 3 girls spilling out of their chalked heart, with one seeming to piggyback onto the bully in the middle. The bully is grabbing her victim's crowning glory. The playground. A little girl of 5, in her second term at school, comes home with her hair covering her face, saying that she doesn't want to go back to school. She doesn't look right, and she isn't wearing the right clothes. She's 5. I was shocked at this beginning so young and talked with neighbours about their children's experiences in the playground. It certainly bore out the research that girls view the school playground as a place where they practice and place a high priority on social play. From the earliest age, what is monitored are clothes and discussions about who fits in, can play various games with whom, and what they think of each other. The key concept is best friends, the girl who will be closest and choose you. Of course, if you have the confidence, you choose her as well so that you won't be left out. At this young age, best friends change quite quickly, and a little girl needs to be alert to the power dynamics of the group if she's to fit in. I wonder if many of you remember this. Several girls I spoke to found this pressure too great and preferred playing with the boys, who were mainly interested in physical games. It was much easier to be part of the boys' gang. By 10 or 11, clothes and makeup become crucial, and selfies, WhatsApp, and other social media continue the grooming. Best friends share clothes, music, makeup, and shut the bedroom door. Research with preteen girls suggests that pop music is an important component of aspirational consumption, as well as being a space for self-reflection and an exploration of femininity and sexuality. A neighbor said, "Just look at the mothers at the school gate. Friendships between the mothers will often echo the friendships of the children, but also emphasize the competition. Who is the best mother? Whose home do they want to visit? Who sets the standards? Even in the earliest days, race and class begin to show. Interestingly, in the UK, in mixed-race primary schools, class is the first difference to appear among the girls. Racial differences appear more established in secondary schools. For us, that's 13 plus. So moving from friendship to sexuality in this context is to acknowledge the libidinal aspect of friendship, as there is an attraction, even chemistry, between close friends. It would take a separate paper to explore who we choose as friends, although I have looked at a brief connection with mother and the playground. But women's friendships do link into the realms of sexuality and desire. I don't have space to discuss how women use their bodies to express their conflictual relationship with themselves. The vividness of tattoos, self-harm, eating problems, clothes to enhance or hide are only too familiar to us as therapists and women. But I will focus very briefly on sexuality. Audre Lorde, in Uses of the Erotic, she says, the erotic is not a question of what we do. It is a question of how acutely and fully we can feel in the doing. As we begin to recognize our deepest feelings, we begin to give up of necessity, being satisfied by suffering and self-negation, and with the numbness which so often seems like their only alternative in our society. Our acts against oppression become integral with self, motivated and empowered from within. Much of the early socializing of women and girls in the playground is to warn them of the risks we take in accessing our desires. As Audre Lorde, are our political as well as our life resources. It is only in the confidence of allowing ourselves to know what we feel and what we desire that we can withstand misogyny and the fear of patriarchy. Such an easy sentence to write, but a huge thing to experience. Women like Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison can dare to say this, to defy mother and stand out. A woman I knew expressed a common theme I've heard many times about how upset she was because she felt that despite everything, her desire for a sexual relationship was shaming and somehow forbidden. She would have sex, but at the same time, disconnect from being present. She yearned for such intimacy, but feared being hurt, rejected, and humiliated as she became known. She was also frightened of the angry, powerful feelings aroused in her, so needed to confront and accept her entitlement to what I've called her cage of emotions, but she was too scared to do so. Many younger women in their 30s that I meet are more confident of their entitlement to be sexual, I'm delighted to say. However, it can still be a struggle. One woman who had had a painful ending of a long relationship was advised by her female friends that she would feel better if she had sex while she recovered, that sexual freedom would somehow counteract the loneliness and shame of a failed relationship because her sexual potency would help her to find her confidence again. She decided that she would date through social media and sleep with people when and how she wanted. We, of course, became worried for her safety, but reassured that friends would know where she was and who she was with, she began this new project. She reported feeling much more potent. She was the agent of her own wishes. She was the subject who could choose, not the object who had to submit. She was having a great time and looking much happier. But then she began to wonder if these occasional partners thought she was a whore or thought she was desperate. She began to feel discomfort and shame, as well as potent and powerful. She still really longed to be loved, to be recognized and found, not just desired and not just for play. Who she would like to see herself as being clashed with who she actually wanted to be. A final optimistic story was told to me by a group member elsewhere. She said that her group analysis had liberated her because although identifying herself as heterosexual, in her group she had fallen in love with a woman who had reciprocated. The woman was in a lesbian relationship outside the group, but what they were free to explore in their group was what they desired in the other, and that their wish to become friends was based on how the other thought and looked and desired them. The woman who told me about this said that it released such confidence and self-esteem in her that she has always been grateful for her group analysis. So perhaps it's possible to suggest that the social, cultural, transmitted pressures that try to control both female and male desire, unconsciously transmitted, but more consciously policed through convention and the social media, may be one of the reasons that there is an increase in people choosing a non-binary route. A wish to discover personal needs and desires that may not fit, and that perhaps there is more freedom to become oneself if we demand the right not to fix desire to gender, and that gender itself is actually a fluid concept. So to conclude, what am I saying about women's relationships with each other? Under patriarchy, women internalize misogyny, which undermines our self-acceptance, our desire, and often through mirrors that seem to know how we should be, our personal sense of who we actually are. The hidden turmoil within all this not only results in feelings of envy and jealousy, of emptiness or loneliness, but also in fearing that men will kill us, may express our own aggression by judging women as lacking. More controversially, it may also be that as women, we project some of this aggression into men, as I think the large group illustrated to me. What would it mean to attend to these aspects of a woman in our groups? What does it mean if the male conductor is father lover, when the group has been brought together by him? Perhaps father lover also has the power to give birth. No wonder the mother is invisible. What does it mean or feel like if the group itself denotes a womb or the matrix, the body of the mother? Within patriarchy, do groups trap us as well as nurture us? I suggest that the female mind does link thought and heart. We are not dispassionate analysts because we know that the personal is political, that the feelings and emotions of those with power, many different sorts of power, can overrule others. As women, we need to refuse a disconnect between mind and body, as I've argued. To change, we need the courage to face our public persona, our critical chorus, and what I've called our secret cage of emotions. We need to question our judgments as women towards other women when understanding that we have internalized the violence of misogyny. As female group analysts, we need the freedom to think with the heart and feel with the mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you so much for your elegant and eloquent presentation that really refreshes some of the questions around misogyny and how we think about them group analytically. And thank you so much for keeping to time. What a paragon example to us all. I'm now going to ask Ronnie Levine to respond. Ronnie is a clinical psychologist, psychoanalyst, and group analyst who practices in New York. She's on the faculties of several group therapy training programs in the USA, as well as running several private training groups. She's been the keynote speaker at a number of local group societies within the USA and published articles on the group therapy experience. She's also enjoyed lecturing and presenting experiential workshops in Europe and in Israel. In 2004, Ronnie was made a fellow of the American Group Psychotherapy Association, the AGPA. Throughout her life, Ronnie's been interested in integrating social, political, and historical currents within the personal. Her interest in group therapy was a natural outcome of her interest in history, psychoanalysis, and the theatre. She's been a regular attendee at GASi symposia, running workshops on managing love and hate in groups and becoming comfortable with uncomfortable feelings. And she was grateful to have the opportunity last year to organise panels and present her thinking about the national leaders' response to the current social upheaval, and in particular, to present her understanding about Donald Trump. She tells me she's delighted to have this opportunity to speak today. So thank you, Ronnie, for agreeing to do so, and over to you. Don't forget to unmute your mic.
There, how we know? Okay. Thank you, Linde. Thank you, Sue, for your beautiful paper. It's really like a beautiful tapestry. And thank you all for this honor. I would like to begin with a personal vignette. 2 weeks after the Trump-Clinton election of 2016, I attended my regional group therapy society. The atmosphere was gloomy, like a subdued funeral with an underlying apprehension rising from the psyche of most people in the society who were Clinton supporters. At one point, a colleague and I took a bathroom break. Now, in this venue, I didn't see the words indicating women or men's bathroom. Instead, I saw the bathroom closest to me with an icon of a stick figure above to indicate a gender designation. Commonly, you probably have everywhere the designation for man, a stick figure and a triangle signifying female address. You might remember that Hillary Clinton's signature uniform was a pantsuit, which was widely showcased in the media. Thinking the icon was a woman in a pantsuit, I walked into the men's room. Embarrassed, I rushed out, but then thought this: in just 1 year, I had an experience of having a woman as a national leader with whom I could identify. And amazingly, the symbolic order of my mind had been altered, even if temporarily as a result of it. I wondered what more would have been altered in my unconscious if Hillary Clinton had won. And for me at that moment, that was what I grieved for the most. I mentioned the men's room vignette to invite us to study what the effects Sue and I, being in these leader positions today and the women leaders tomorrow, will have on your society, and what might have been and still may be a men's room. We will discover if we will come away, even if temporarily as I did, with an alteration of the mind. A time of social uncertainty. And, you know, there's always social uncertainty. So when I wrote this, it was even more current. There are things. The United States is currently in the midst of a great social reckoning, ushered in by the epidemic, a racial crisis, and the former President Trump's vitriolic behavior. Trump's blatant strongman attacks on women, reflecting his sexism and misogyny, his attacks on race and on democracy, have underscored the the intersectionality of a polarizing cultural war in my country and worldwide. There's a disturbing battle between those that have power and dominance and those who don't, those who are threatened by the loss of historical privilege, and those who have been denied and have been exploited by it. Trump's hypermasculine attacks on women, particularly at women that opposed him, embodied by his continuing attacks on Hillary Clinton, have shone a light on the malignant and everyday pathological effects of patriarchy. Sue's rich paper brings to our attention how the social political dynamics of patriarchy and misogyny distorts psychosexual development of the self for women, and how these dynamics play out in women within her relationships with her mother, her friendships, and manifest in the field of group analysis. Social political forces become part of our makeup, and as such, we are all affected and participate within it. Where are we? Sue's paper raises questions. How does a woman develop a full self in this world when the world she lives in conspires to place her in a socially subordinate role? What kind of self can develop and mature in a world that has had fundamentally entrenched conscious and unconscious, socially sanctioned restrictive views about women, her role, her abilities, her body, her mind, her desirability, and her capacity to have authority? You might argue that the times have changed, as a male colleague from this organization not so long ago expressed to me. We are less binary with gender identity and gender orientation, more social acceptance of diversity of race, class, and now gender have begun to open up and are being explored. It has been a long time since when I, as a child, was required to use the pronoun he to represent myself. The masculine overpowered the feminine. I thought even then, as a child, where am I in he? But that was then, when the social interpsychic split were so rigidly reinforced, when women with minds were considered asexual. The mind was masculine, and women were objectified as bodies or dumb blondes, as Marilyn Monroe, a firebrand in her own right, was portrayed as an object for male pleasure. And women's occupations were relegated to the caring or serving roles and professions. These were the ego ideals and the gender ideals that defined women for men and women. Women needed to extrude, disavow, and repudiate socially alien parts of herself in the mix to maintain emotional equilibrium and social stability. Are we so far from that? How does a woman's self become a subject? Ideally, women have desire and the desire to be desired and would move fluidly from subject to object. Yet her capacity to retain a self as a subject is precarious in a society that disenfranchises or subjugates women, even now. How does a woman move from a Me Too to an I Too, from Me Too to I Too? The Me Too movement boldly took hold rather recently, propelled in the US by Trump's sadomasochistic behavior toward Clinton and other women in full view during the 2016 election. The nation had to sit quietly by as helpless bystanders and watch with no super referee or protective force to interfere with the centuries-old denigrating operation. Soon after the election, what was suppressed and repressed shifted in the culture, a return of the oppressed. Women's voices were beginning to be taken seriously. 4 years later, this domination pattern was repeated in the US, a sadomasochistic power dynamic, helpless bystanders, and then a social awakening following the brutal murder of George Floyd, a Black man, by a white policeman, viewed by a worldwide audience, indicating that recognition is a necessary prerequisite for change. We have witnessed some success in the Me Too movement, in which women who have been mistreated, sexually harassed, emotionally blackmailed by the power of an abusive man have now begun to publicly assert themselves, and they are beginning to be listened to in a different way than ever before. The Me Too, though, is a reactive movement to men's abuse of power. Women are fighting against being a mistreated object. For the rest of this talk, I will explore the development of the self of a woman, a dialectical movement from a reactive object to a subject, and as such, briefly analyze patriarchy and the psychodynamics of the self for women, and then turn to how internalized misogyny affects women's relationships, and finally provide my analysis of the large group issues that Sue raised. Why patriarchy? I have a slightly different slant than what Sue relied on. Perhaps Lacan has it right that we are driven by lack, and it may explain patriarchy as a social political solution to a psychodynamic and existential dilemma. Patriarchy establishes a systemic social hierarchy of power and domination, a relational order that endorses the superiority and privileges of men over women. Quite a bargain here. It establishes a set of gender norms and roles that justifies and sustains men's power. Patriarchy, even with its restrictive roles and norms for both men and women, provide an answer, a solution to vulnerability, powerlessness, the loss of control, of not getting it all, associated with the original, absolute, helpless dependency with mom. It can provide social stability, but the underlying, inevitable, existential deprivations, unmet needs and desires, including the desire to dominate, also drives the hatred of women. Patriarchy sees the world through a specific phallocentric lens and has defined truth, values, and aesthetics, invalidating, silencing, and excluding alternative feminine perspective. The late feminist psychoanalyst Muriel Dimon wrote, "The power to name is also the power to blame and shame." So how does a woman develop in this social context? Life begins with the mother, and it's the mother that has been the center of modern psychoanalytic thought. It was central for post-Freudians and was central for Sue. I want to place Sue's thinking in the context of some feminist and psychoanalytic thinkers' perspectives and how misogyny within the family is transmitted and internalized in women. The absence of the mother, the invisibility in Foulkes' exploration of the mother-daughter experience, left women powerless in the social discourse with unnamed and unprocessed experiences. There was a lack of maternal representation, a lack of language, a lack of exploration of understanding of the complexities of the merger, individuation process with mother from the get-go. Without this exploration, how would women become visible in our groups or with each other except through the masculine lens? The mother-daughter relationship, as Sue described, is built in conflict with attachment and self-differentiation. Some feminist thinkers perceive that the phallocentric culture places pressure on the daughter to become alienated from the mother to the extent that the woman is experienced as being insufficient in care or social power or status. In developing a self, the girl pivots her attention to her father. In holding the father's gaze, if she's able to hold it, and especially if she cannot, the girl learns to reinterpret reality through the male gaze. Now, even if the father takes delight in her daughter's subjectivity, which would mean so much, the father represents the social order to some extent and conveys the social norms through his behavior and gaze. This paternal gaze, this gaze of desire for me, shapes what a woman and what femininity is. This becomes internalized and contributes to the daughter's self as object, the role of submission, Jessica Benjamin describes. The power of the male gaze is repetitively reinforced in the culture at large. Now, if our journey is to find a way to have relationships in which one does not sacrifice the self for the other, or sacrifice the other for oneself, patriarchal coercive norms compromises this possibility. Those social roles have expanded. Many women unconsciously sign on to what Ruth Stein terms a perverse pact with men that attain reassurance, love, and exciting sexual desire by foregoing her own entitlement and or by giving her partner an exquisite sense of entitlement. In the latter case, a woman's power is vicariously achieved in her association with her man's power as his exciting trophy. Sue looks to the mother as the conveyor of sexist normative transmission, an accommodation process in the formation of her daughter's self. The culture through these unconscious transmission colonizes the mind in men and women. Essentially, our selves are formed and shaped by the social order through an internalization of these norms, through internal paternal representations, and through a masculine language. Sue wonders about women colluding, but we're all co-participants in patriarchy and misogyny. It is the air we breathe. The consequences of these social intrapsychic processes to create an accommodation of the self, Sue describes in her first level public persona, a false self-development. Judith Butler would call this level performativity, that our gender roles are a series of repeated acts that are highly regulated by social coercion that dictates what is normal, masculine, feminine, perverted. My going into the men's room was unconsciously a transgressive social enactment. I had a momentary alteration, or perhaps an unconscious rebellion of the social symbolic order in my mind of what is masculine and what is feminine. For some women who have a positive identification with gender identity and role that conforms to the patriarchal landscape, that feels to be an authentic self. But the accommodation process does not work for everyone. Many women have and are alienated by social pressure. The objectification of women places these women in a bind to conform to the gender norm and surrender self, or be undermined and humiliated for straying from them. The conflict creates an estrangement of the self and body, which Sue really just beautifully described, with vulnerable feelings of defectiveness and inadequacy. In the US, and perhaps in your country, estrangement is amplified in women who have been additionally marginalized by race, ethnicity, class, and gender identity. So how does internalized misogyny infiltrate women's relationships with women? Women's friendships provide essential healing and emotional balance in life that has become so compromised by the need to accommodate. Some friends help us to adjust better to the social order. Others help us navigate our authentic self. They are truly love relationships. A few comments on competition, hate, and envy. Sue asked me to respond to why 53% of white women voted for Trump. Black women by a large majority, some say 94% voted for Clinton. A few comments. Patriarchy, along with class and race, has created a hierarchy of status and desirability. Those women who felt their white or class privilege or traditional patriarchal family values were threatened by the other, or saw their interests could be advanced, were more likely to vote for Trump. But there was another reason that some women and men voted against Hillary Clinton. They hated her. It's a good case example, Sue. There were many undermining factors causing her defeat, including that she was a flawed candidate. Why hate? She was hated mostly as a woman seeking power. She was a woman that was breaking the masculine mold. Patriarchy in the US had limited woman experience with power and social integration. The haters on the left thought she was stealing the nomination from Bernie Sanders, and the haters on the right thought she was a monster. For many, she was a transference object holding a primitive, malignant, engulfing, depriving maternal transference. Her subjectivity was unseen and disallowed. She represented all that was bad or missing or withheld. She was both too weak and too strong. She was demonized as a witch, Satan, stirring up too much of a threat, too much primitive anxiety, too much rage projected on her. She was destroying our assigned gender role. She wasn't perfect. But for many of these women, she was seen as out of touch or a contemptuous elitist or a destroyer of emotional and family stability. This became the narrative. Who actually was Hillary Clinton? She was still so toxic that she did not campaign for Biden. Now, on women hurting her friends. So what does a woman do with the experience of being devalued and with the possibility of being prized? Does she attack herself? Does she attack men? Does she attack women? How does she love and hate? What unspoken transactional pacts are formed with men and women? I suggest 3 points here. Raised through cultural transmissions to be self-sacrificing, women as a group have socially and internally struggled with assertion of power, sexuality, competition, anger, and the expressions of it, and struggled to not self-attack and to maintain an emotional insulation, that kind of shield when being the object of shame. All of which is enacted in our relationships, women's relationships with women. 2, patriarchy, which intersects with social groups and its heteronormative and gender binary bias, creates a pecking order of social status and privileges of desirability. Women are prized for possessing what is acceptable, and this is internalized in women, generating a competitive pecking order of its own, which has led to inclusion, hurting and shameful exclusion, and envy. Is there a woman here who is not worried about where she or they fit in? 3, Sue reflects that envy is not just for obtaining the prize men's privileges. A woman also envies her friend's success at breaking out of the social confinement. The friend's freedom or success is felt as an attack on her self-esteem and with her alignment with patriarchal norms. This envy is derived from an unconscious friendship pact that does not allow her friend to differentiate from her or outshine her. The merger state, or wished for, with mother is replicated with having friends that mirror her. Differences are experienced as a separateness loss, an abandonment that can lead to further feelings of inadequacy and that retaliatory response. This further contributes to women policing of patriarchal norms that Sue discusses. So how do we get there? Given the ubiquitous social oppression, can a woman have her own subjectivity, her own desire, and her own power? In order to exist as subjects, women need to be recognized by both men and women. In order to be powerful, women need to acquire power. This may be a start here. The recognition of a woman and the reclamation of the central role of the mother merger in psychoanalysis has spawned more inclusive perspectives and a new language. The mind and body are not split, but fluid. Feminine passivity has been redefined as holding, containing, reflective curiosity. This is a different assertion of the self. Women need to be in positions of power to engage in the process of the alteration of the gender paradigm in her and within the group's social unconscious, something for which I was so eager to experience. And finally, consider a woman as a leader in a patriarchal world. So how does this all play out in the large group? The foundation matrix includes unconscious beliefs, values, and norms on gender, race, and class, which further influences patterns of communication. This concept laid the groundwork for Harper's social unconscious, which also includes that the group unconsciously operates in ways to make itself unaware or blind or unaccountable to the effects that toxic normative communication has on the other. The result is that the marginalized other becomes invisible. Enter mixed men, women group, and a woman conductor. A woman is invited to be a conductor, but unconscious social norms are in opposition to this. Her leadership violates the group assumption as father or lover. The language, the template of how experience is understood is masculine. A competitive phallic narcissism masks masculine vulnerability. If the forces are virulent, an anti-group force organized in a paranoid position, the woman will be casted as an object, a female object, not as a subject. She'll be a leader without authority to lead. Her attempts to enter will at this point be defeated. Thinking in this phase is binary, including the concept that men's have minds and women's have hearts. Women group members may follow suit and take a more submissive position to the men. One female rebel is shot down. There are no revolutionaries. They have signed on to this unconscious transactional pact. Or another possibility, a woman takes charge. She may be seen as the Iron Lady, a masculine version of a leader, and is thus able by submitting to the masculine example, which allows for a woman leader by conforming to the unconscious ruling norms of the group. This joining the norms, though degrading to women, does allow for power. A third possibility is that there's a growing awareness and a woke relationship to the ruling norms, which allows for more flexible thinking, more possibilities. The woman conductor has greater freedom to assert authority, can step in and is heard. Heart and mind are in sync. This is a progressive and regressive process. And we are in a moment of change. It is both a destructive and creative moment. Our unconscious notions of gender, class, and race are being challenged. The status quo is being challenged. It is an anxious moment. It's calling for awareness, recognition, and acknowledgement for something new to emerge, something integrative. It is not known yet what that is, but we are being changed by it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ronnie, for offering us another woman's point of view and from another continent. I wonder how we will all be altered by reflecting on what you have said and by the conversation that Sue has started. Many thanks to you both. I wonder if we might just unmute ourselves to applaud because it's so difficult in this silent space. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So we have come to the end of this 44th Foulkes Lecture, and tomorrow I hope to see many of you at the study day, where we will continue the process. I think it just remains to remind you, we're going to leave the room open for the next 15 minutes so that people can say their personal goodbyes to each other and to Sue and Ronnie. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Please join the room early as you did today. Thank you again. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you all for being here. It's been wonderful
Thank
to have
you.
so many people here.
Yeah, thank you.